Then he took a deep breath, calmly got out of the car, and took a sprint towards a 40-person melee in front of the only strip club in town. Police officers, have you ever had an all-units available call? If so, what happened? Story 1. I served in West Belfast, Northern Ireland. Due to the high threat level in my division, we would patrol in 2 armored Land Rovers, each with a minimum of 3 armed officers, one of which would have an assault rifle or SMG. Basically, we could handle most scenarios. One day, however, our vehicle was in an intentional head-on collision with a stolen car as it was driving towards local children playing in the street. This resulted in our front wheel bending to the point the vehicle could travel no more. In a few minutes, the community we were there to protect turned against us. It was like Black Hawk Down. A few hundred people came out of the woodwork as they realized we were an easy target. Petrol bombs and bricks rained on top of us as we attempted to pursue the car thief on foot. We jumped in the back of our vehicle and called for assistance. In under 5 minutes, a fleet of approximately 5 to 6 armored Land Rovers appeared from the neighboring division and drove the crowd back. They managed to tow us to safety, and we lived to get bricked another day. Story 2. Former Royal Canadian officer here, from a small tourist town. I was working on a regular midweek day shift when we received a dispatch call for a bomb threat. It was in the industrial/commercial sector of town. We all went there, called in the bomb squad. The dogs started to search, and we got people out of the area. After we got everyone clear, we were waiting for the dogs to finish up when we got another call that the local bank's silent alarm was turned on. Now, we're in Canada, in a tourist town. Things are usually relatively calm, but this was absolutely chaotic. We got the all-units call. They called our neighboring department to help. We all split and headed to the bank. We arrive with around 20-some patrol cars all around and go in to see all the bank employees bound and gagged, smoke everywhere from smoke bombs. We realized very quickly the bomb threat was the diversion. We immediately got a BOLO to get the 3 males identified by the bank staff, including a former bank employee. We got the BOLO out to CPIC, got words to airports and border crossings. We managed to catch 2 out of 3 of the guys. The last one went to trial with me as the arresting officer, and my partner was able to provide statement evidence on the bank manager. Story 3. 25 years ago, in a smallish rural town, my dad was a beat cop on patrol. My cat brings in a live mouse and is playing with it in the kitchen, and my mom is deathly afraid of rodents. So she calls dispatch and tells them my dad needs to come home. Dispatch gets on the line and tells my dad to switch to a secure line. There's an emergency at home. My dad's driving home to take care of the issue when all of the cops, probably like 4 of them but in a small town that's basically the whole patrol, they come in with lights and sirens blazing on my house because they all heard there was an emergency. My mother was absolutely mortified. Story 4. I was a military police officer on a rather large base. I was getting off shift and being transported back to my barracks by the guys coming in so I could check in my weapon. Suddenly, we got a call for an all-units responding to a section of base housing. A military wife was having an affair with another soldier while her husband was on deployment. Supposedly, the husband was due to return soon, so she tried to break it off with the other guy, and he responded by stabbing her several times. My team leader and I searched the tree line with our weapons drawn because he's armed and it's dark outside. Little did I know, I actually passed the guy with my team leader a few yards behind me, and suddenly he comes out from behind a tree saying, "You're looking for me?" Scared the crap out of me. My team leader covered him while I went in for the handcuffing, making sure that I had my knee firmly planted in between his shoulder blades and thoroughly covering his upper torso into the muddy terrain. Not sure what happened after that. He was taken to a holding cell by another squad, and I went home. Ended up getting transferred from that base a few months later, but I know the wife survived the wounds. Story 5. This story is from a few years ago when I was working in a downtown area with a higher than usual crime rate. One night, we received a report of a car theft in progress in an alley. By the time we arrived, the thief had already broken into a vehicle, and we spotted him trying to hotwire the car. I approached cautiously, trying to stay out of his line of sight while my partner circled around to block off his escape route. But as I got closer, I realized something was off. The guy wasn't panicking or acting frantic. He seemed oddly calm. As soon as I identified myself as law enforcement and told him to step away from the car, he just looked up and smiled. "You got me," he said, as if we were old friends. He didn't put up any resistance when we arrested him, but I later found out he had been in and out of prison for most of his life and had no intention of getting away. It was a strange interaction, and I couldn't help but wonder if, after all these years, he had just grown resigned to the cycle of crime and punishment. It was a reminder that sometimes, the mental toll of a life of crime takes its own form, and the suspects we encounter are often just products of their circumstances. Story 6. When I was a rookie, I was called to assist with a high-risk warrant for a suspect who had been evading law enforcement for weeks. The intel we had suggested that he was armed and dangerous, so we had the SWAT team on standby, and all the officers were prepared for a tense situation. We surrounded the house and began our search, moving cautiously and quietly to avoid tipping off the suspect. As we entered the house, we cleared room by room, but we found no sign of him. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. Then, one of the officers spotted something strange. There was a crawl space in the corner of the living room, and it looked like it had been disturbed recently. We approached cautiously, and sure enough, there he was, hiding in the crawl space, trying to blend in with the insulation. He didn't put up a fight when we found him, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. After weeks of evading capture, he was finally cornered. It was a surreal feeling knowing that we had successfully brought him in without anyone getting hurt. Story 7. I was doing a ride-along during my first year in law enforcement, and we got a call about a suspicious person walking around the neighborhood. It was a quiet part of town, so when we arrived, everything seemed calm. We spotted the guy, and he was just standing on a street corner, seemingly waiting for something. As we approached him, he immediately turned and bolted. My partner chased after him, and I followed behind, keeping a safe distance. We ran through several backyards, jumping fences and dodging obstacles. The guy was fast, but we finally caught him in a dead-end alley. We pulled him to the ground, but that's when I noticed something strange. His clothes didn't match the usual appearance of someone trying to escape. As we searched him, we realized that he wasn't some random criminal. He was an undercover cop from another department. Apparently, there had been some miscommunication, and the guy was involved in a covert operation that we had no idea about. My partner and I were both incredibly embarrassed, but the undercover cop was good-natured about it and laughed it off. Needless to say, I learned the importance of proper communication when responding to calls. It was definitely a learning moment. Story 8. Not a cop, but I once got an all-units call to my house. Backstory. My mom was dating a big druggie, and everyone knew who he was and that he lived with us. I was around 15, and one night he went off the rails and was beating the crap out of my mom. I got involved just in time to see him swing at my sister, who was 7 at the time. I ran for the phone and called it in. I got as far as the address when he grabbed me by the neck and threw me, while the dispatcher heard my garbled yells and called it in as a possible homicide in progress. That, combined with his reputation, sent every single cop in the surrounding jurisdictions flying our way. By the end of it, I think there were 20-plus officers at our house. I ended up hitting him with my mom's cast-iron skillet to keep him there just as the first officer showed up. He was super cool about it and pretended he didn't see a thing. It was a terrible night, and my mom was mad at me for months, but man, you do not screw with my little sister. Story 9. This one happened during my time as a detective. We had been working a case involving a series of robberies at local convenience stores. The suspect had been wearing a mask, and there were no clear leads on his identity. After a few weeks of interviews, surveillance footage, and cross-referencing databases, we finally got a tip that led us to a suspect. He had been arrested a few years earlier for similar crimes, but he had a clean record since then. We didn't have much to go on, but we decided to stake out his apartment. One night, we saw him leave the building and get into a car. We followed him for several miles, keeping a low profile. Eventually, he stopped at a remote area near a lake and got out of the car. We decided this was our chance to approach him. As we got closer, he spotted us and tried to make a run for it. We gave chase, but he was fast. We called all units to set up a perimeter around the area and eventually cornered him near the water's edge. He was caught, and we found the stolen items hidden in his car. What struck me about this case was how methodical he was in planning the robberies. He had studied the routines of the store employees and had been careful to cover his tracks. It was a reminder of how important it is to stay diligent and not overlook even the smallest details in an investigation. Story 10. I was doing a ride-along in college in a fairly small city in Georgia when we got an all-available units call. The address came in, the lights and siren went on, and we took off toward the scene. We were hauling butt at about 120 miles per hour across town. I had no idea where we were headed until we got there. The only thing the officer said to me was, no matter what happens, stay in the freaking car. If you see anyone with a gun, call it on the radio like this, and showed me how. If any of us get shot, call it in and stay in the car. Then he took a deep breath, calmly got out of the car, and took a sprint towards a 40-person melee in front of the only strip club in town. We were the first car there. Over the course of the next 30 seconds, officers arrived and kept coming until they outnumbered the people fighting. The officer I was riding with was completely on his own for a 10-second eternity and was able to rip about 10 people apart from fighting before backup arrived. It was the single bravest and most humbling thing I've ever seen with my own eyes. When it was all over, he got back in the car with 3 drunk and beaten up dudes in the back, turned to me, and said, "So when are you going to sign up?"